Hi, I'm Pastor Susan Schwartz. I am greeting you today from the beach on Lake Erie at Barcelona, New York. And I want to share with you some thoughts about relationships. Relationships are a central part of life. From the time we were born, or even before, our relationships with others have been an integral part of our well-being. We are interrelated to each other, humans, but even animals too. Have you noticed that most animals live out their lives as part of a group or pack or school? There are a few who tend to be a little bit more solitary, like bears and skunks and moose. But by and large, for safety and for camaraderie, animals live together. Interrelatedness is true in the environment as well. Weather gets stormy. We have a flood or tornado or hurricane, and everyone and everything is affected. Our world exists, you see, in relationship. So of course, then if we humans do not take care of the environment, well, then we humans and the whole world are affected. And relationships are important in our faith life too. I'm going to take a few minutes to share with you about the faith relationships in my family, and maybe you can think about what you would say about yours. My parents went to church every Sunday and took us, me and my two sisters, along with them. They grew up in religious homes. My father's side of the family were firm Methodists. That meant that they attended Sunday worship faithfully and also were not so sure about playing cards and dancing, and certainly not drinking alcohol. Well, my grandfather would drink a swig every now and then and hid the bottle back in his work shed. My dad's mother was very adamant about filthy liquor and that you should not drink it. Those attitudes were fairly common back in those days, especially among Protestant groups and members of the Women's Christian Temperance Union, who had been instrumental in outlawing the making, sale, and transportation of alcoholic beverages and the passing of the 18th Amendment to the Constitution. The family also owned a cottage at the Lancaster Methodist Campgrounds, which was located about 20 miles from their home. The campground was founded in 1872 and was a place where people could go to spend time away and listen to good preaching and Bible lessons and enjoy talented Christian singers and basically renew their faith. It was like going on a retreat or going to a Bible camp, but each family had their own cottage and then joined together for various events. The campground experience was an important part of my family's faith experience. So my father and his two sisters were raised in the Methodist tradition and spent many summers at the campground. My mother's side of the family was also Methodist and had a cottage at the campgrounds, but the family also dallied around with the Presbyterians. And it is probably fair to say that my mother's side of the family, while churchgoers, were not as strongly rooted in the faith as my father's side. So while my father was raised Methodist, when he went to college, he went to a Lutheran school, Capital University in Columbus. At Capital, he went to chapel and experienced how Lutherans lived out their faith. My father studied history, and one of his professors was also a Lutheran pastor. And it was through the influence of that professor and pastor that my dad became a Lutheran. So Lutheran, by the way, that he applied to and was accepted by the local seminary to be trained to become a Lutheran minister. When my parents dated and got married, they did so with the understanding that Mom would also become Lutheran. My father's sisters both left the Methodist Church and became members of their husband's church. My one aunt became a Presbyterian, and the other aunt married a minister in the Christian Reformed Church, which is similar to Presbyterian but with a Dutch heritage. So my father's siblings were not strongly as rooted in the faith as he was, but rooted enough that they continued throughout their entire life within different denominations. My mother's side was not so strongly rooted in the faith. My mother only had a brother, and through the years he did not have a strong church relationship. I do not remember my cousins going to Sunday school or church. At one point in time, my uncle's wife became interested in the Catholic Church, and so they connected that way. My uncle's second wife was a very strong Methodist, and their marriage brought him back into a church relationship. How did my family's faith affect me? Well, my experience at the Methodist campground certainly had a profound effect, as did going to church on Sunday with my parents, and Sunday school, vacation Bible school, and even church camp. But the Methodist campgrounds was something special. During the summer months, we would often spend Sunday afternoons and evening at the family cottage, and that meant I could do things that otherwise I was not able to do. The campgrounds had a swimming pool. Well, at home I did not have a pool I could use, but at the campgrounds I could go swimming, and I loved swimming. And I could watch movies at the auditorium on Saturday nights, and listen to concerts on Sunday afternoons, and walk around on my own and explore different places. Those were things that I could not do at home. There was a little shop where I could go and get chocolate candy. Chocolate candy. I don't think there's a kid alive that does not love candy. And I was loved. Being loved, feeling loved, and loving others is a critical piece of the Christian experience. And I really felt loved there. Part of it was because my family had a long tradition there. They knew a lot of people and were respected, and that rubbed off on me. There was one minister, Reverend Brewster was his name, and he and his wife just adored me, and it was mutual. My mom would jokingly tell the story of the time when I had come back from the swimming pool, and we were in the kitchen as I was taking off my suit. My mother turned back to me, and I was gone. But a couple of minutes later, Mrs. Brewster laughingly brought me back, buck naked, because I had run down to see my friends, Reverend and Mrs. Brewster. And what I learned there found a voice in me as well. My parents would grin when they talked about the little Susie, the preacher. It seems that I was very moved by the Sunday afternoon services, and especially the preachers. Not to be outdone, after the service was over, I would run back to the cottage, pull out my little table, place it on the sidewalk, and preach to the people as they were leaving the service. I felt loved and accepted there, and I was fortunate in that way. Relationships are absolutely key to a living faith. Jesus was about relationships through and through, with the disciples, with those who followed him, and with those he healed. Relationships. Jesus cared about people. He loved them, and in that, he drew them to himself. And if we are in a relationship with someone, we need to know about that person. An ancient tradition in much of human culture is the dating process. He learns about her and she learns about him, or whatever the configuration. And if they learn and like, well, then they may talk about a more committed relationship. Relationships depend on knowing the other, which of course is why our faith, vacation Bible school, Sunday school, and yes, communion, confirmation is so important. We get to know God, and we can also get to know God by reading the Bible and praying, both of which we can do on our own. I think that sometimes we have made the faith too narrow. Sometimes we have made being a Christian just a matter of knowing things about Jesus or God. Sometimes we have thought of being a Christian as a matter of thinking the right things, the right way, or being able to give the right answers. We sometimes make being a Christian just a shallow good feeling. Sometimes just a good feeling around the campfire, slapping one another on the back and saying how great God is. Sometimes we can make it superficial, one-dimensional, just intellectual or emotional. But faith is more. God is more. In a way, faith is like a dance. God reveals self to us, and we learn about God so that we can love God and receive God's love. We receive God's love and love God so that we can learn more about God, and so the dance begins. It is the dance of relationship. And once the dance begins, we may just decide to invite others into the dance as well. So think a minute, if you would, please, about your faith experiences in your family. Who taught you about God's love? Family, friends, teachers? Where were the places where you have felt most loved? Has there been a special time or a particular place that you really felt God's love? If you were to rate yourself on how well you live out God's love, what number would you give yourself? Say 1 to 10. And why would you choose that number? If your relationship to God is like a dance, what kind of dance is it? Slow dance, square dance, cha-cha, twist, rumba, freeform? And who can you talk to about these ideas?